For years, Meghan Markle has been portrayed as the modern icon of empowerment, a woman who defied convention, who challenged centuries-old traditions, who bore the weight of global scrutiny with poise. From Hollywood auditions to royal corridors, her journey has been framed as a triumph over adversity, a narrative of resilience and moral courage. But what if that image, carefully cultivated over decades, only tells part of the story? What if the Duchess's path to influence involved silent, calculated steps that contradict the very ideals she now champions publicly? Before we move on, click like, share this video, and subscribe for daily royal updates. Dr. Jordan Peterson, renowned clinical psychologist and cultural commentator, recently turned a critical lens on this question. In interviews and analyses that have gone viral across media outlets, he raised a provocative claim that Meghan Markle's years before entering the royal family may have included a period of elite, secretive immersion, experiences that were both empowering and morally complex, and which have remained largely absent from her public narrative. Peterson doesn't make this claim lightly. He frames it in the context of archetypal hypocrisy, a concept borrowed from Jungian psychology. This is the idea that when individuals project moral superiority while privately acting in ways that contradict that image, a profound psychological conflict emerges, a shadow that, if ignored, shapes identity in ways that the public rarely sees. At the center of this unfolding narrative is the Golden Mirage, a $50 million superyacht registered through a Dubai-based shell company. Equipped with helipads, private suites rivaling presidential residences, and infinity pools that glint under the desert sun, the vessel served as a floating nexus for billionaires, financiers, and influencers. Here, according to Peterson and corroborating digital investigators, Meghan was not merely a guest, but a participant in high-level gatherings that combined business, culture, and social maneuvering. These were not casual parties. They were meticulously organized, semi-private events, operating under NDAs and managed by intermediaries whose role was to preserve discretion while cultivating influence. The question arises, how did an aspiring actress with modest Hollywood credits come to find herself aboard such a vessel? According to flight manifests, discrete digital traces, and whistleblower accounts, Meghan's arrival was executed with precision, chartered private flights, diplomatic clearances, and access to areas reserved for strategic guests. Observers describe the events aboard the yacht as highly orchestrated, where every smile, conversation, and introduction carried strategic weight. Cultural brokers, financiers, and entertainment executives interacted under the polished guise of leisure. Yet every encounter functioned as a negotiation, a test of social acuity, and a stage for influence. Peterson interprets this period as formative, not incidental. He argues that Meghan's ability to navigate these environments required not only charm and poise, but an advanced understanding of hierarchy, perception, and adaptive charisma. She moved between different social pockets, interacting with energy executives in one corner, cultural intermediaries in another, and Western producers at discreet dinners. The goal, in many ways, was mastery of social calibration, the ability to read rooms, adjust presence, and convey precisely what each individual or group needed to see. It was an immersive education in the mechanics of power, an experience that arguably equipped her with tools she would later employ in the royal environment. Yet this immersion is largely absent from the public record. Social media traces from the period are sparse, often erased or curated. Photos and posts are minimal, while anecdotal references, deleted or archived, suggest a carefully managed presence. Digital investigators note overlapping appearances, flight logs, and recurring intermediaries, all pointing to participation in a pattern of elite gatherings. This is where Peterson's critique deepens. The public story of hardship, struggle, and outsider status may contrast sharply with the strategic, highly connected experiences that predated royal life. He doesn't accuse, he analyzes. The discrepancy between the narrative of victimhood and the evidence of strategic participation forms the kernel of what he calls archetypal dissonance. In effect, the Golden Mirage period may have been both an opportunity and a crucible. It provided access, influence, and experience in negotiating power structures, but it also required discretion, selective silence, and an unspoken alignment with patriarchal and hierarchical systems that are rarely visible to the public eye. According to insiders, Meghan's presence was deliberate, her interactions calculated, her movements choreographed to maximize social leverage. She was performing a form of soft power, bridging cultures, smoothing negotiations, and demonstrating capability in an environment that rewarded subtlety, intelligence, and strategic engagement. This raises uncomfortable questions. If the Duchess of Sussex navigated elite patriarchal systems with skill and gained influence through participation rather than opposition, what does that imply for the narrative of struggle that defines her public persona? Peterson frames this not as a matter of moral condemnation, but of psychological observation. The curated identity, once it becomes a public brand, can eclipse lived experience. The tension between persona and self, between narrative and fact, creates a moral and cognitive dissonance that is rarely acknowledged but powerfully shaping. By framing her early exposure to power networks as a preparatory stage for royal life, Peterson challenges audiences to reconsider what constitutes genuine empowerment. Was it struggle against oppressive systems or strategic mastery of them? The answer is layered and complex. It involves not only the choices of Meghan Markle, but the societal frameworks that elevate curated narratives over transparent history. It is this duality, luxury and influence versus public victimhood, that sets the stage for a deeper exploration into the Duchess's past and the mechanisms that propelled her rise. The Golden Mirage, a 220-foot vessel anchored discreetly in the Persian Gulf, was less a yacht and more a mobile academy of elite social mechanics, a place where wealth intersected with power, and influence was cultivated as deliberately as a financial portfolio. From the polished mahogany decks to the glass-enclosed dining suites, every inch of the yacht was designed not merely for luxury, but for strategic interaction. Observers describe the layout as intentionally segmented. Social salons for high-level introductions, private cabins for confidential discussions, and rooftop lounges for informal networking that blurred the lines between recreation and negotiation. Onboard, events were meticulously choreographed. Each gathering followed a structured cadence. Arrival protocols, introductions curated by intermediaries, sequential dinners designed to encourage alliances, and post-event communications orchestrated through discrete digital channels. Flight manifests show private charters ferrying select individuals from Dubai, London, and Los Angeles, emphasizing exclusivity. These were not conventional parties. They were microcosms of power hierarchies, with each attendee placed according to social capital, influence, or potential leverage. The intermediaries, concierges, cultural brokers, and liaison officers played an outsized role in this ecosystem. Their job extended beyond hospitality. They were architects of influence. Every handshake, every seating arrangement, every shared meal was pre-planned to maximize strategic outcomes. These intermediaries maintained extensive records, notes on personality, interests, negotiation styles, and prior connections. For Meghan Markle, these figures were both gatekeepers and tutors, guiding her navigation of complex social terrains and subtly instructing her on how to exert soft power without overt assertion. Peterson frames this environment as a floating school of power. Unlike formal education, lessons were experiential. How to convey authority without confrontation, how to align with diverse personalities, and how to deploy charm and discretion to generate influence. A casual observer might see glamour, cocktails, and sunlit conversations, but beneath the surface, every interaction was a test of social calibration. Meghan's ability to read the room, identify key figures, and modulate her presence was being honed in real time, with immediate feedback from intermediaries who monitored subtleties that could shift alliances. Elite dynamics on board were complex and often contradictory. Wealthy financiers, cultural icons, and corporate strategists shared the same decks, yet each brought distinct expectations and behavioral codes. A hedge fund manager might demand precision in conversation and visible intelligence, while a Hollywood producer prioritized charisma and narrative engagement. Meghan, according to reports, learned to adapt fluidly, providing just enough insight to impress, demonstrating cultural awareness to connect, and exercising discretion to avoid missteps. This adaptability was a cornerstone of her emerging capacity for influence. Events were not spontaneous. They were crafted to simulate political and corporate negotiation environments. Dinners included scenarios where discussions shifted from casual topics to investment decisions, cross-cultural collaborations, or philanthropic strategies. Informal lounges were used for exercises in persuasion and reputation management, where subtle gestures, body language, and timing could indicate dominance or deference. Guests were expected to navigate these micro-nuances seamlessly, testing not just social skills but ethical judgment, loyalty, and strategic thinking. Peterson highlights a critical element: the intentional tension between public display and private negotiation. On the surface, the yacht radiated glamour, leisure, and enjoyment. Beneath, every smile, toast, and compliment carried strategic significance. Attendees were simultaneously participants and observers, actors in a theater of influence where perception often outweighed reality. Meghan's role, early in this process, was both observational and participatory, learning to act, to project authority, and to discern which alliances could be leveraged later in her life and career. The Golden Mirage also functioned as a crucible for moral and psychological development. Exposure to extreme wealth, combined with subtle power plays and hierarchical maneuvering, challenged participants to reconcile personal ethics with pragmatic strategy. According to insiders, this environment forced rapid development of emotional intelligence, situational awareness, and self-regulation. Every misstep, an ill-timed comment or misread social cue, was noted by intermediaries, providing immediate feedback loops. Over months, these iterative lessons created a refined social acumen, essentially a boot camp for influence. Peterson emphasizes that this period may explain Meghan Markle's later capacity to navigate the British royal system. The skills required to manage protocol, media scrutiny, and interpersonal power dynamics within the monarchy are not taught in conventional schools. They are learned through immersion in high-stakes, multi-layered social networks. The yacht, in this sense, was both a training ground and a rehearsal space for a future stage of unprecedented visibility. By the end of each voyage, attendees, including Meghan, had acquired not just personal connections but a refined understanding of influence as a transferable skill. Every conversation, gesture, and alliance contributed to a portfolio of social capital that could be mobilized for both professional and strategic purposes. In Peterson's analysis, the Golden Mirage represents a liminal space, part playground, part academy, part negotiation chamber, and entirely a mechanism for shaping future operators in global networks. The yacht, with its glimmering decks and private salons, thus stands as a symbol of a hidden education, a place where luxury and strategy intersect, where influence is cultivated deliberately, and where Meghan Markle's ability to navigate elite systems was forged. Understanding this period reframes not just the narrative of her early career, but the mechanisms by which modern power operates, invisible, fluid, and meticulously choreographed. Among the glittering guests of the Golden Mirage, a few names stand out: financiers with stakes in emerging markets, Hollywood producers with global influence, and political operatives who navigated corridors of power in multiple continents. Meghan Markle's first encounters with these figures were carefully orchestrated by intermediaries, who positioned her to observe, learn, and contribute without overstepping. The yacht, as a floating classroom, provided live case studies in negotiation, alliance building, and perception management. One evening, a formal dinner brought together a hedge fund magnate, a media mogul, and a European diplomat. The seating was deliberate. Meghan found herself between the diplomat and a younger tech investor. Her task was subtle: maintain engagement, ask questions that reflected cultural awareness, and demonstrate listening skills while signaling confidence. Observers later noted her capacity to navigate both worlds, showing interest without seeming naive, asserting presence without dominating the conversation. This balance became a recurring lesson in the dynamics of power. Influence is as much about restraint as it is about action. Another key event involved a private roundtable on international philanthropy. Guests were asked to share insights on their current initiatives, creating a space for strategic collaboration. Meghan's role was observational at first, but intermediaries encouraged her to offer reflections on potential synergies. By suggesting a bridge between a media platform and a global educational initiative, she subtly demonstrated strategic thinking and a grasp of stakeholder interests. These micro-contributions were noted and later referenced in casual follow-ups, illustrating an essential power lesson. Small, well-timed interventions can leave outsized impressions. Recreational spaces on the yacht, sunlit lounges and poolside decks also served as informal classrooms. A casual game of bridge or a late-night discussion over cocktails often evolved into exercises in influence. Guests learned to read micro-expressions, track alliances, and assess credibility. Meghan, initially cautious, began to anticipate social cues, understand hidden hierarchies, and adapt her tone and body language to match the context. Each interaction was a lesson in situational intelligence, the ability to interpret and respond to subtle signals in high-stakes environments. Peterson notes that the yacht's power lessons extended beyond conversation. They included timing and packing, knowing when to speak, when to remain silent, and when to defer to others. During one evening's dialogue on cross-border investments, Meghan observed a heated exchange between two senior figures. Instead of intervening, she chose to validate points neutrally, building her reputation as a measured presence. The lesson: influence often grows from strategic patience rather than overt assertion. In quieter moments, intermediaries provided direct coaching, highlighting patterns in Meghan's interactions, where she excelled, where subtle errors might undermine credibility, and how to position herself for future opportunities. These sessions reinforce the principle that elite social ecosystems reward adaptability, perception management, and the cultivation of relationships over time. By the conclusion of her early voyages, Meghan's transformation was noticeable. She had learned to navigate high-profile gatherings with confidence, to identify emerging alliances, and to exercise discretion strategically. Each handshake, toast, and observation contributed to a growing acumen that would later underpin her public and private endeavors. The Golden Mirage, in essence, had become both a stage and a mentor, teaching lessons that formal education or conventional career paths rarely offered. Upon leaving the Dubai yacht circuit, Meghan Markle entered a world that appeared far simpler on the surface: auditions, screen tests, and Hollywood red carpets. Yet the lessons of the Golden Mirage, its covert hierarchies, elite intermediaries, and subtle exercises in influence, remained indelible. Unlike casual social networking, the yacht had trained her to operate in spaces where every word, gesture, and relationship was both currency and leverage. The transition to public visibility introduced an unexpected challenge. Suddenly, the very skills she had honed were scrutinized under a relentless media microscope. Interviews dissected phrasing, magazine covers evaluated posture, and tabloid speculation tracked her social interactions. For the first time, the private lessons of subtlety collided with public perception. Meghan's ability to calibrate interactions, once a secret advantage, became a source of misunderstanding. Observers labeled measured poise as aloofness, strategic charm as calculated manipulation, and discretion as secrecy. Peterson highlights the psychological tension this created. The individual who had mastered shadow integration and strategic adaptability now faced a court far less forgiving than the Golden Mirage: public opinion. Every interaction, now amplified by media and social platforms, became a performance whose stakes extended beyond influence into identity validation. The internal challenge was profound: how to retain authenticity while navigating an external world that interpreted every act as either virtue or vice. The first real media storm came as her career gained momentum. Paparazzi photos, social columns, and entertainment blogs amplified every misstep. Simple deviations from expected norms, turning a head, maintaining composure, choosing to remain silent, were magnified into evidence of elitism or intentional misbehavior. The lessons learned aboard the yacht, which emphasized strategic presence and timing, collided with a culture that rewarded overt accessibility, visibility, and the appearance of spontaneity. Meanwhile, internal challenges multiplied. Meghan confronted the dissonance between her public narrative and private history. The elite networks she had navigated discreetly remained largely invisible to the world, yet they had shaped her understanding of influence, power, and leverage. The private, formative experiences that had elevated her suddenly threatened to alienate the very audience she sought to inspire. Peterson argues this dissonance is common among those who ascend via curated systems. The path that cultivates strength and skill often contradicts the mythology required for public admiration. The scrutiny intensified as Meghan's personal life became headline material. Relationships, friendships, and alliances, once discrete lessons in diplomacy, were now analyzed as character evidence. Every connection to powerful figures raised questions about motives and morality. The strategic calibration she had perfected was interpreted as pretense or manipulation. Every carefully executed engagement, previously a subtle assertion of competence, became fodder for speculation about authenticity. This period, Peterson notes, represents a critical pivot in identity formation. Meghan faced what he calls the public shadow, the collective projection of expectation, admiration, suspicion, and criticism imposed by an audience invested in a simplified narrative. Managing this required not just poise, but an ongoing negotiation between self-perception and external perception. Each public appearance demanded both emotional labor and intellectual awareness, reinforcing lessons from the Yacht about reading rooms, assessing hierarchy, and deploying presence with intent, but now under relentless observation. The culmination of these pressures, according to Peterson, is both paradoxical and instructive. The skills that enabled Meghan to operate effectively among elites, the subtle negotiation of influence, reading hidden hierarchies, cultivating relationships, also exposed her to misinterpretation. Mastery of private power translated imperfectly into public optics. The very discretion that secured her access became a liability when transparency was demanded. Ultimately, Meghan's post-yacht experience demonstrates the cost of navigating dual worlds, the private sphere of elite strategy and the public sphere of perception. The Golden Mirage had imparted invaluable lessons about leverage, composure, and situational intelligence. Yet in the glare of global attention, these lessons required adaptation, reframing, and sometimes concealment. Public perception, media scrutiny, and the challenge of reconciling private skill with public expectation became her ongoing test. Peterson closes the analysis with a final insight. Influence and power, once cultivated in secret, cannot be entirely hidden. They shape identity, perception, and behavior in ways that invite both opportunity and critique. For Meghan, the Yacht was the classroom, but the world was the exam. The skills she gained prepared her for extraordinary heights, yet the public lens reframed every lesson as both accomplishment and controversy. And so the narrative ends not with scandal, but with understanding. The Duchess of Sussex is not merely a figure of tabloid fascination, but a case study in the intricate interplay between elite power, personal strategy, and the unyielding gaze of public scrutiny. The Yacht taught her how to navigate the world of influence. The world taught her how to survive under observation. Together, they shaped a trajectory that remains both extraordinary and enigmatic, leaving questions about agency, perception, and integrity lingering long after the headlines fade.